All right. I've got a few questions here. Thank you for all these. I'm going to go with a couple of lighthearted ones to start with. I just flipped through them real quick. I didn't have time to read all of them, but these are a couple of fun ones. And by the way, if you have a follow-up question, John's got the mic, and he'll jog around the room and get it to you. If you have another question that comes to mind, you'd rather not ask it out loud, and you just want to write it on the card, write that down on the card and hold it up for John. He'll come get it and get it to me. Somebody wants to know why the San Francisco Giants are in last place. Now, I don't think they're in last place. I think the Colorado Rockies are in last place, but the Giants are just barely ahead of them. And I'm certain that God is testing me, and this is a time of trial for me to face this. All I can say is Julie and I are 1-0. We went to a game the week after Easter at Oracle Park in San Francisco, and the Giants won 5-0. So maybe we should spend more time going back to San Francisco for games. And then the next one is kind of a fun one. A deeply theological question. As a San Francisco Giants fan, what is your opinion of the universal DH? You know, designated hitter in baseball? It is an absolute evil thing, just so we're clear. I'm not a DH fan. All right. Here's the next one. Brother Miles, where's your personal niche quiet space that you go to center yourself? There's a couple. One literally is at home. We have a porch that's closed in. And when we first moved into our place, we put a picnic table out there and the kind of things you put on a porch. And it just felt crowded and cramped and uncomfortable and weird and strange. And luckily I'm married to Julie, who thinks very, very creatively about these things. She got a couple of easy chairs, bought a little cabinet for a collection of things like books and stuff, and bought another little cabinet for me because I bought some more books, and really created what we call our reading space. Our reading room. So I just love to go there early in the morning. I will confess, I will say a brief word of prayer, very brief word of prayer, and then I read The Athletic, and then I go to the ESPN, and then I go to the New York Times, and then I go to the Wall Street Journal, and then sometime around 6:30 or 7 is when I get into my reading, my quiet reading for the day, and until I come on down here to the church. So that's one. And then I've really discovered, anybody gone for hikes or walks over at Quarry Park? It's really cool space, and I love walking around there, and they're still expanding and building, and I think there's 4 million apartment buildings that have been built now, but it's really nice, and sometimes you go out there at the end of the day, like right about now, when it's still a little bit of light, it's a great place to go for a walk, and I can't work out and play ball and do all the things I used to do, but I still get out and move around as much as I can, and that, for me, movement is a place of peace, too. The harder I walk, the faster I walk. Pray for Julie because I leave her behind. But the harder I'm working out, the less my brain is thinking, and that's probably one of the best things I can do for myself personally. All right. Where in the world is church/faith, Christianity / growing the most? And then the follow-up question is, where has been the most surprising or unexpected growth? Those are two great questions. The church is exploding around the equator and south. It is literally just growing like crazy. I preached 10 years ago or so, more than that, 12 or 13, in Haiti. And part of the reason there was a big crowd because they wanted to come see the Americans. I was there with a group of folks. But it was an outdoor service under a tin roof in Port-au-Prince. It had to be 90, I'm not kidding, it had to be in the 90s, 90, 93, 94 degrees, unbelievably humid. I'd been told that the pastors always wear a full suit and tie, so I want to follow their tradition. I wore a full suit and tie. I soaked through my shirt and my jacket. I may have left those in Haiti. I'm not sure, but it was unbelievable. And the spirit of joy. And these folks had just experienced a horrific earthquake. Haiti has been dumped on. That's kind of a crude phrase, but they've been dumped on for hundreds of years. And yet the joy and the vibrancy of their worship service, the singing, everything else was just amazing. It's one of been my most enjoyable worship experiences. And so that's really where the church is growing and expanding. And here's what's kind of interesting about it as well. There's a more Pentecostal style to those kind of churches. They use more, just put that right there, thank you, sir. They use more evangelical sounding language. They take the Bible very seriously, sometimes literally. And what's fascinating is, whereas evangelicals, I'm oversimplifying here, very conservative evangelical Christians, I'll say it that way, tend to run away from social justice issues as though those are secondary or tertiary or not important at all. These folks who have this very Pentecostal, conservative sounding faith also take social justice issues very seriously. My friend Jose Escamilla in San Diego is a Disciples of Christ pastor, but he's got about a 1,000-member church, and he sees 800 of them on Sunday mornings. Many of them are immigrants or hoping to immigrate to the United States of America. He has a very, very, very conservative understanding of many things in the Bible, and he's also fighting for immigrant rights. So it's a fascinating kind of mix to see that folks who take the Bible that seriously, well, they actually do read those parts in the 8th century prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Amos and Micah and others who call for caring for the least of these like Jesus does. And so that, in this follow-up question, was surprising or unexpected growth. I think that's one of the most surprising things is in places where you wouldn't expect. They understand, they would know that quote from Rob Bell that I put up a little bit ago. They would understand that. Their peace doesn't come from how wonderful their lives are and how beautiful their homes are or the brand new car they just bought. Their peace comes from a sense of being within the presence of God. And it's kind of a cool thing to see. When did you decide to be a minister, and what led you to become a minister? How much time do y'all have? When I was 5 years old, I was in the sanctuary after church on a Sunday. My dad was a pastor at Norwalk Christian Church in Norwalk, California, LA County. And my mom says, she's the one that told me this story, that I scooted a chair across the chancel and stood up on the chair so I could see over the top of the pulpit, and I began to do an imitation of my dad preaching. Hand gestures and all that stuff. My mom would say that's where my call was planted, and there's probably some truth to that. As a kid especially, I just thought my dad was the greatest thing that ever existed. Learned about other issues, as we all do, about all our parents, as our children and offspring have learned about us as well. So that's probably where it started. But I was in high school, I was going to be a basketball coach and a school teacher. When I graduated from college, I was offered 2 jobs. One was as a basketball coach and English teacher at a small private school in San Jose. The varsity team, which even though it was a smaller school, a small school level, at 22 years of age, coaching the varsity was like the gigantic thing for me. But my chaplain in the school had given my name to a church that was looking for a youth director. And the pastor and his wife happened to be driving through, this is a little Bible college in Eugene, Oregon, happened to be driving through Eugene and invited us to dinner, and we went out to dinner with them. And he was like, look, you can volunteer at the high school and coach, you can do all that, but we would love to have you. We'd love to have you as our youth director. I flew down and interviewed. Here's an exact quote from the interview afterwards. I wasn't in the room when this happened, but I heard about it later. Half the search committee was made up of high school kids in the actual youth group, and then adults. And they were like, well, what does everybody think? And Bob Sharp, who to this day I remember his name, Bob Sharp, it was a 17-year-old kid, great kid. He said, Glen's fine. We really like Julie. So that's kind of the story of my life. Anyway, 2 years later at that church, the board of directors called me in, and I thought I was in trouble. And they said, we think you have a call for ministry. And we don't have a lot of money, but we can give you $4,000 toward whatever you need expense-wise. We really want to support you, and we believe this is true. And Julie and I went out to dinner. We laughed, we cried, we had some pretty hard conversations, and then we decided, yeah, let's do this. So that's kind of when it happened. Was being a preacher's kid, seeing the church all my life. And one more little. I went to seminary in Upper East Tennessee, is what she's saying. We packed everything we owned in our super cool Toyota Tercel, along with our little dog, Sally, and that's all we had. We had a couple dollars in the bank, didn't have a job, didn't have a place to live, didn't know what we were going to do, and it's a longer story to tell all that. But yeah, we just decided to trust God, and we went. All right. One of Jesus' disciples was handicapped. Why didn't Jesus heal him? Which disciple was that? Say again? Little James. And he was little because, like, maybe he was a little person or something, or? There was a big James. I don't know. In fact, it's funny. This is a question that comes up a lot. I'll tell you a real quick story. In Kansas City, I remember my staff, her name was Carla. She was Carla with a K. I had another Carla, was Carla with a C. Carla with a K oversaw our children's ministry, and she and her husband had 4 kids. The 4th one was Cameron. When Cameron was 11 months old, he came down with a fever. It got up to about 103. They took him to the ER. It kept getting worse and worse. And by early the next morning, Cameron was gone. A horrible, terrible tragedy. I preached the memorial service for Cameron. That sanctuary in Kansas City was a big one like this one here. Sat about 900 people. I swear we had 1,000 people in there. About 4 months later, by the way, my text for that funeral service, 2 words. Can you guess? Jesus wept. And one of the things I said was, go to the worst parts of Iraq that have been destroyed, and right on the wall, Jesus wept. Go there, a hurricane or something that hit Miami. Go to Florida, where homes and lives have been ruined, and right on the sidewalk where a home used to stand, Jesus wept. Come with me to a hospital room here in Kansas City, where Cameron spent his last minutes, and right on that wall, Jesus wept. I got that idea from Barbara Brown Taylor, a brilliant preacher. About 6 months later, Carla called and said she wanted to come in and talk to me, and please do. She said, and I have her permission to tell this story. She said, I just want you to know something that happened. She's in a women's Bible study group in her neighborhood, at least was back then, in her neighborhood. And it's made up of evangelical, conservative folks and some more fundamentalist folks and some more progressive folks like Carla. And they all love each other and care for each other. And they agreed to that times they're going to disagree, and that's okay, and that sort of thing. At some point, the conversation turned toward Cameron. And how are you doing, Carla? And her friends are just there to support her. And then one of the women, write this down, something you should never say. One of the women said to Carla, I just don't understand why you didn't get a miracle for Cameron. And Carla, in a calm voice, said, you're right, you don't understand. Cameron was the miracle. So that story, I used that story here about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe it was 7 or 8 now, on Easter Sunday, and I got tremendous feedback about how powerful that story is. And it's just, it's one of those unanswerable questions. Why did this one get healed and that one didn't? That's why when I get nervous about people saying that God may have saved this politician or saved this person, where was God when the children were gunned down in Uvalde? If that's true. And we can name how many other dozens of mass shootings of children. So that's one of those. It's a Job question. Read the book of Job, and you get 40 chapters later, and Job doesn't get an answer still. So it's been a universal question for about 5,000 years. Thank you for whoever started that, kicked that off. Thank you. I believe in everyone going to heaven, but what about the real bad actors? That's something else. i.e. actors, i.e. Hitler, Jeffrey Dahmer, and the like. Is there a time of purification or a way for them before they can accept God's love? Great question. What I believe is something that I picked up from the Desert Fathers. Thank you, sir. From the Desert Fathers is there, and there's many that believe if there is a hell and there is hellfire, the fire is a purifying. What's the right word for that? Purifying fire, a refining fire that burns away the bad stuff, so that the gold or the whatever it is you're melting can be pure. I've always liked that image, that if there is a hell and there is fire and all that the fire is an act of grace to take away that evil. I also, and I don't want to undercut the evil that is Hitler especially, because it's just, his evil is indescribable. I mean, it's just indescribable. Millions of Jews, hundreds of thousands of others brutally killed. I mean, just it's indescribable. But I also like to remind us what Alexander Solzhenitsyn said. Do you remember this quote about the line between good and evil? Do you know this one? The line between good and evil runs through every heart. And that's in no way am I comparing us in this room to the evil that is Hitler. But it's also something to keep in mind that maybe the fire won't have to burn as hot for most of us as Hitler, but maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's part of the refining process. Also think of the story, well, that doesn't fit that doesn't fit that answer. So that's my belief, is that if there is a hell, it's a refining fire, not a punishing fire. It's a fire that purifies and takes away the evil that's a part of all of us. Does FCC encourage adult volunteer children's teachers and or helpers at our services? So if you're interested in helping with our children's ministry, you can talk to Sarah Keens, or you can talk to Julie Richards, and the two of them will let you know how that works. There's a full background check that we do these days, and that's not because we don't trust you, it's because we don't trust some of those bad actors, as that last question said. And we want to be sure, absolutely sure, the children are always safe. I have a couple of stories from when I was a youth minister, and we had to take some hard action with some volunteers who turned out we didn't have a background check on them, because back in those days we didn't do background checks. So yes, that's a possibility. If you're interested, talk to Sarah or to Julie. When someone makes a financial contribution, when is the recipient modified or notified? And is the donor notified? Let's see if I get this right here. When someone makes a financial contribution, when is the recipient? Is this like a memorial gift, or does somebody mind clarifying it? I'm sorry, I can't quite get the handwriting. Generally speaking, we notify, if you're a first-time giver, you get a thank you letter from me. I don't see the amounts, it's not something I worry about, but you'll get a thank you letter from me saying if you're a first-time donor ever. All of those. That's something we started about 3 years ago. Secondly, you should get a notification from the church if you do it electronically. I use my phone. I've got a little church app that allows me to connect to the church. And if you don't know how to, if you don't have that on your phone, I can't tell you how to get it, but John Gerard or somebody in the business office will be able to tell you how to do that. And I automatically, anytime I do an electronic gift, I automatically get the thank you, right? I mean, it comes 30 seconds after I click send. So if you're doing it that way, if you're doing the old school and writing a check or dropping off cash in an envelope or something, that process takes a little longer. And whoever asked this question, if you haven't gotten notification, please let John or me know. We'll make sure that we double check that got received, was in the business office. Is that the right answer, John?
That was the right answer.
Thank
The
you.
same goes for the in honor or in memory of gifts. Both the person or the family that it's in honor or in memory of is notified, and you also, as the donor, should get a note that just says thank you. We've had a couple of transitions in the business office, so if you haven't gotten one of those, please let me know that we've inadvertently dropped the ball, and we will get on that in a big hurry. Thanks.
So to back up on what he said, we have a new controller now. Deb Humphrey is now on our staff officially. Yay, Deb! You can thank Deb for being on our staff. Patty Link, who has only been on our staff 50 years, decided maybe she would go ahead and retire this year. So she's moving out of that position. We're gonna have a big celebration for her coming up in a few weeks. There'll be a reception, I think, in here afterwards, and it'll be fun with Patty. So yeah, there's some transition and some moving parts in there. So sometimes that happens. Things can fall between the cracks. And honestly, if you got a concern or a question, you can ask me, you can ask John. Either one of us would be glad to take care of that. And of course, if you ask me, I'll be like, great, I'll get back to you. John? If everything, in life, everything is geared towards performance, how is the final judgment different? Cool question. Should everything in life be geared toward performance? Grades? Grace, yeah, grace. You know, one of the things that happened in my life that was great was when I found out I didn't have to be somebody I wasn't. Some of you remember Dick Wing, who was our senior pastor here for 23 years before I arrived. I was his associate minister for 7 years before he came here, back in the late 80s to the mid 90s. And after he announced his resignation and was coming here, and I knew it, by the way, I figured it out, because he told me he was on vacation, but he was going to be stopping in Columbus, Ohio, just to see some friends. I'm like, you don't have friends in Columbus, Ohio. And so I looked around at the churches and went, First Community Church. I'll bet he's going to that, and I was right. Anyway, a month or two later, before he moved out here, I took him to lunch and said, I'm going to do Senior Minister 101. Tell me everything I need to learn. We spent 2.5 hours, had a couple of burgers, enjoyed a cold beer, and we just got into all kinds of things. And at some point, I looked at him and said, this is the first time in 7 years I realize that I'm not you, and I don't have to be you. Because, I mean, you know Dick. I mean, he's like, hey, how you doing? Things are great. How you doing? And he just can go 8,000 million miles an hour, and he's fun, and he's cool, and he's hip, and he knows wine and all that. And I worry about the designated hitter, you know. So that was a huge gift to me to realize before the performance who I am as a child of God was more important than anything else. So the final judgment in heaven, is it any different? Yeah, it's way different. If you want a slice of what heaven's going to look like, go watch the kids getting off the bus at Akita. And those kids, I've heard third graders say this. Was that a say so? That's the end of the closing program they have. What do you have? You know, there's a psalm with the words say so. What do you say so on this evening? This one little third grader, or it's more like a fourth or fifth grader, said, this is the first time I wasn't afraid to be just me. That's heaven. When you experience that, you've already gone to heaven. Oh, here's a good one. The media continues to lie, and yet all the sides to all the issues know it, and still it continues. It's not a question. True, okay. I might say more about that in a little bit. I always feel sorry for Judas because he realized what he did and killed himself because of the guilt he felt. Is that bad to sympathize with Judas? And then there's another question after this on the same topic. It is not bad to sympathize with Judas. I've even preached a sermon once where I kind of was borderline on the edge of heresy. In some ways, I kind of said in the sermon, I'll say it now. I'm not so sure Judas thought he was doing something wrong. That maybe Judas was trying to push Jesus in a direction they thought Jesus ought to be going. And maybe his idea was wrong. Maybe his thoughts were not more guided by power and control, and maybe him kind of wanting to be at the top of the chain with Jesus, whatever it might have been. So I think it's totally fine to sympathize with Judas. I read a book, it's at least 30 years ago now. It was titled, Judas, Come Home. All is Forgiven. And the author of that book is a preacher who was in San Francisco. He was taking the BART. Anybody been on the BART in San Francisco, the Bay Area Rapid Transit? He was taking the BART across the bay over to Berkeley for something, under the bay, sorry, when he stopped at the bathroom in this BART station, which, by the way, is not exactly, don't do that, go somewhere else. Anyway, he walked in the bathroom, and somebody had written in red lipstick on the mirror in that bathroom, "Judas, come home, all is forgiven." And this pastor said, "That's a sermon." And he turned that sermon into a book, and I don't know what's happened to the book. It's fallen off my shelves. But I've always believed that. And then was Judas' betrayal necessary for the resurrection to happen? I don't think, even though Jesus seems to know. Is there any Kleenexes out there? I've got I haven't recovered from a sinus infection, and it's still lingering around, which is why I have a deep bass voice these days. Thank you, Chuck. Sorry about that. What was I saying? Judas. Oh yeah. So Jesus seems to say in the Gospel of accounts, right? The one who's here is going to do this. Now go get out of here and go do that. Does that mean that was in some way God telling Judas, you got to do this, and you're just going to die now, and you're bad? I don't think so. I disagree a little bit with Matthew, Mark, and Luke and their version of what is being said to Judas. In that, I think what happens is God works within what is happening. Doesn't pull strings like a puppet, making stuff happen. Now, if you have a Presbyterian background and you're into predestination and that God knows everything all before it's going to happen, well, good for you. I don't like John Calvin, not one of my favorite theologians. I think God works within the mess and within that steps in. I mean, even the question is, did Jesus have to die? I don't think so. But when Jesus came and preached what he preached and welcomed everyone, especially those on the margins and all that he did, well, those in power were threatened by him. They killed him. And God worked within the middle of that then to bring new life and to start something new. Bonhoeffer came to a place, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I'm assuming this person means, where he believed it was right to dispatch the German Führer. We'd probably oppose that idea. Is such a decision and action ever justifiable? That's a really good question. This was something that Bonhoeffer struggled with, probably right up until the day he was murdered by the Nazis, which is just either a day or two or a few before the war ended. You do know, don't you, that Bonhoeffer had a visiting faculty position, I think at Union Seminary in New York City, and was offered a full-time position when Hitler was coming into power and said, no, I've got to go back to Germany. And he was one of the few that opposed Hitler, few pastors in Germany that opposed Hitler. Jim, you and I were in a conversation about this yesterday. What was it, about 2/3 of the church? Was it something like that? I can't remember if that came up in that conversation or where I saw that number. Like 2/3 of the churches said something more or less to the effect of they signed a loyalty statement to Hitler. I mean, think about that. Who do I report to? Not even the governing board. I mean, technically, yeah, I report to Jesus. If you look at the ordination certificate in my office at South, it says that Glen Miles is a minister in the Church of Jesus Christ. And I'm an American. I love my country. We pay taxes. We work hard to make that payment as small as we can. But we're Americans. I've supported friends in the military, all that stuff. But my ultimate loyalty is not there. My first calling is as a pastor in the Church of Jesus Christ. That means sometimes I have to say hard things in the pulpit. That means sometimes I have to rewrite a sermon at 4 o'clock in the morning on Sunday because some crazy thing happened on Saturday night after I went to bed at 9:30. That's where my first calling is, and I wouldn't have to be careful. I'm not sure I would agree with what Bonhoeffer eventually decided was we got to figure out how to assassinate this man. On the other hand, 6 million lives screaming out from Auschwitz and other places maybe demands that we maybe have to do take some hard and difficult action. I've told you this before, I'll tell you again. Coming out of seminary, being ordained, moving into ministry, I really fully believed that I was a pacifist. And then something happened about 6 months after our first child was born. While I was at we were in San Diego, I was at a conference up in LA for preachers. Julie was working for court-appointed special advocates. They fight for the rights of kids in court. She came home, picked up Nate from childcare, our baby, walked in the house, and he started screaming. She was like, "What's going on? We're home, it's okay." And then she looked around. Every drawer, every cupboard, everything was open. Stuff was thrown all over the floor, the whole house. She did a quick walk through the whole house. Everything emptied, dumped out. And then she noticed a window had been jimmied open. Called the cops. Clearly the guy came and then she found, Julie had like one, at that point we were poor. She had maybe 2 really nice pieces of jewelry. The guy found those. He also drank, I had 1 bottle of liquor in the house. It's a true story. I had 1 bottle of liquor in the house. I hadn't opened it yet. It was a bottle of Jack Daniels. It was 2/3 empty. So not only did he steal her diamonds, but he got a good buzz on, probably was drunk, and he also found my autographed Willie Mays baseball glove. Yeah, no O's for Julie and oh, you lost your glove. Oh no. That's so terrible. Okay, now let me get back to why I'm telling the story. So, that night, I was playing a lot of softball back in those days. I had a collection of 5 or 6 softball bats. One of them I parked next to our bedroom, next to where I lay on my side of the bed, because if somebody's coming after my baby and my wife, I'm going to protect them. And I remember waking up the next morning and going, "Oh, hey, there's that bat. Wait, I thought I'm a pacifist." So I just tell you that story, and that I came out of seminary, absolutely, this is the only path, but I wouldn't just stand there and watch someone take my wife or my child. So I do think there are times when we have to defend. I just think we have to be unbelievably careful in the conversation, talk with ethicists and so forth. Okay, what time is it? Oh, we're doing fine. Why don't we use the old hymns, especially in the book, in the hymn book, I assume? So I think we use a number of the old hymns. One of the things that's cool at 9 o'clock, by the way, Janelle and the band, they do sort of updated rock and roll versions or more contemporary style of good old hymns like For the Beauty of the Earth and all these kinds of things. Easter Sunday was all the typical traditional Easter hymns, yet with kind of a rock and roll and a good backbeat rhythm. We do use traditional hymns in other places, but a lot of times, maybe this is what the person's referring to, the words have changed. And some of that is because we don't want to have language that implies that God's a boy. Read Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the earth, etc., heavens and the earth. And what does it say at the end? God created humans, male and female, in whose image? God's image. Now, I don't think God is both male and female at all. I think everyone in this room, in one way or another, is a reflection of God's identity. So we've tried to change some of that language to reflect theological understanding of the broadness of God's love, and that God cannot. And we've even done this in prayer sometimes. Sometimes we do the Lord's Prayer as our Father. Sometimes we do it as our mother. Sometimes we do it as our friend. You'll hear it, especially at South, as our Creator. All those are good. And in fact, you can find dozens of names for God in the Bible. God is a rock. God is a fortress. God is the Good Shepherd. I mean, you can start labeling all those things. And so we want to be careful in our hymnody, I think that's the right word, that we don't end up just talking about God in that one fashion, that God is male. And then the other thing with the books, we went away from the books during COVID for a safety reason. And some of the hymn books that we have are a little bit out of date. There's a couple different hymns that have even been updated since those hymn books were bought, probably 30 years ago now. So that's some of the reasons. If you've got a traditional hymn that you'd like to sing, whoever this is, send me a note. see what we can do. One year on Easter, I told a story from Philip Yancey, a Christian writer, whose wife worked with Alzheimer's patients in a memory care unit at a senior adult facility. And one day, every Sunday, they had a worship service, and there were about 30 or 40 people in this worship service. And for some of these folks, what's the number one thing they connect to? Music. They may have forgotten everything, but you start singing a song. Well, on that day, the song was Old Rugged Cross. And this woman stood up in the back, a woman who hadn't said a word for a year. And she stood up and she said, in the middle of the song, too hard, too painful, stop, don't sing. And then she walked out. Yancey's wife followed her as one of the caretakers was guiding her back to her room. And she heard her humming the song. The woman who said, too hard, too painful, don't sing. And I don't have the exact quote in my head. That's a sermon I preached 10 years ago in Kansas City. Yancey's wife said, somewhere in that broken mind of hers, she was connected. What are the words to Old Rugged Cross? On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. She felt shame in that moment. And yet it was in the hearing of that song that she was able to come back to a peaceful place with Yancey's wife as they embraced, and she shed perhaps tears of joy. Don't hold me too close to that story. It was 10 years ago. I said to her, I finished a sermon at about 7 o'clock on Saturday night. It was the fourth version of it. I sent a text to my music director there. His name's Paul Tucker. He's from Jamaica. Brilliant musician. Grew up in the Adventist church, very, very conservative church. Said, Paul, can you play Old Rugged Cross on the piano during communion in that church? They have communion every Sunday, even on Easter. He immediately wrote back and said, yes. I gave that sermon. That was my closing story. I'd said something about we can leave our shame, we can leave our suffering, we can leave all our pain behind, and in the power and the beauty of the resurrection, find that new life. Something like that at the end. And then it was time for communion, and instead of singing a hymn, we just went right into Paul on the piano, playing Old Rugged Cross. So, now, I've got some theological issues with that hymn. Maybe some of you do too, and I don't think we've sung it since I've been here. But sometimes there is a way to sing some of these songs in a way that's okay as long as we're clear about why we're doing it and what it means in that moment. I got a lot of stories about old hymns and things. I could go on. What is the best way to pray when you feel the world is going to hell in a handbasket? Well, first of all, let go of the handbasket. I think that's a prayer. John says when he gives the pastoral prayer sometimes, that we believe in this church that your prayer may be silent, but we trust that God hears you and knows you. I've said before, this comes from the Apostle Paul, sometimes the Spirit intercedes for us with sighs too deep for words. You ever been in a hospital room with somebody who was literally groaning? I got a call in Kansas City once from good friends of ours, Dan and Shelley. Their son, Charlie, a baseball player, had collapsed while working out with the baseball team. They were in the weight room. He collapsed. He was not responsive. He's in the back of an ambulance. Glen, can you come? Well, I was with my colleague. Monica was there. She was on our staff. For some reason, I didn't have my car. Monica drove me. The two of us drove. We ran into the hallway where we knew he would be, or we hoped he would be. And literally, as we got to the end of the hallway that intersected with another one, here comes Charlie on a gurney. And I can still hear his mother just groaning, this deep sigh that came. Have you ever heard a lion growl early in the morning on safari? That's what she sounded like. Just this, I can't even repeat it. It's just horrible, horrible, awful groan. That was a sigh too deep for words. Charlie's fine, by the way. I told this story at one of my first sermons here 9 years ago. I forgot to say, Charlie's fine. And I must have had 120 people go, is Charlie okay? Oh, yes, sorry. Thank you. I'll work that in the 10 and 11 o'clock. So I think that's part of it is, I heard Sarah Keenes do a sermon a couple years ago where she was talking about some issue, and then she just goes, Jesus Christ. And she said, I meant that as a prayer. Have you ever been that upset with the world or what's going on when it feels like it's going to hell in a handbasket? And all you don't know what else to say? Just Jesus. Or Jesus Christ. Or God. Or I don't know. Or like my friend Shelley, just let a groan go. Consider that a prayer. Does heaven overflow? Sure. I think. I would even say, well, you know the old joke, right? Do you know this joke? An Episcopalian dies. Oh, wait, before I tell that one, there's another Episcopalian joke. You know this one, right? Wherever 4 Episcopalians are gathered, there's a what? A 5th. An Episcopalian told me that joke, just so we're clear. Another one, this is I'm going to tell part of the joke I'm going to tell you. Well, I'll tell you this one later. This one, back to the heaven one. The Episcopalian dies, goes to heaven. St. Peter meets him. So glad you're here. Welcome. Let me take you to show you where you're living. And they're hiking on the gold streets of heaven, and they come past this really large complex of homes and apartments and condominiums. It's just huge. But Peter says, just as you walk by, do you know this joke? You heard this joke? Just shh, be quiet. It's like, why do I have to be quiet? It's heaven. Aren't we singing hallelujahs and having fun? Yes, but these are all Southern Baptists. They think they're the only ones here. It's kind of a mean-spirited joke. It's also true. That's what I believe about heaven. There's going to be a ton of people there that we're going to be surprised by. I've told you about a couple of experiences I've had. I can't wait to find out what it's going to be like and to see if we really do get to reconnect with friends, with family. That'd be that great reunion, whatever it'll look like. Here we go. Let's have someone bake that sort of like bread pudding we had some months ago, and it was very popular, served with sausage and bacon. Okay. Yeah, amen to that, sure. I thought it was really good with a little bit of syrup. Thank you. Thank you. Rebecca, can you stand by me when I'm preaching? How do you know where we will actually be and what it will be like? I assume that's a question about heaven. Here's my answer, and this isn't original to me. I know as much about what heaven will be like as a 9-month-old fetus still in the womb knows what life is going to be like. Now, the baby's alive, it's healthy and strong, everything, it's fine, but there's no way it has any idea what's coming. That's the trust I have in whatever happens in death, is that I, like that baby, I have no idea, but I trust that there is a life to come. What do you think about Pope Leo? He's a Chicago White Sox fan. I think it's great that he's a baseball fan. Being a vocal advocate of peace despite the political backlash. Do you think it gives other Christian leaders their voice back? It's interesting what happened with, I think this is accurate. I'm pretty sure I read that Pope Leo said those things before President Trump said, you're weak on crime and all of that. That he said it actually before, but it didn't get published until after. And so a lot of people thought that was him getting into a one-on-one with Trump, a sort of a religious, theological ping pong game or something. A. B, I think, do you think it gives other Christian leaders their voice back? Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I talk to my buddies about a lot in ministry is, when do we use our voice? The kind of voice that question is referencing. When do we use our voice? Because it just seems like, and I've kind of hinted at this a little bit at times, it just seems like every week there's something I could preach a 20-minute sermon on. And not just about Republicans and stuff, but just stuff, crazy stuff going on in the world. Not just about the Republican leaders in the White House. That's what I meant. And so it's because if we do that too much, we're losing our voice. And you just can't react to this and that and everything else and expect that somehow that's going to solve all the issues and make our church feel better, et cetera. So when do you? And I'll go back 20 years to give you an example of a very, very hard sermon that I preached. It was in 2003. I'd just been hired at the church in Kansas City. Church very much like this one. Similar size, similar budget, similar milieu, sort of purple, not red or blue, but sort of purple, maybe purplish blue, maybe, or I don't know. Anyway, in fact, in that church, I was criticized on my first Sunday for quoting Martin Luther King. I'm like, how you can't get in trouble quoting Martin Luther King. Anyway, a couple months later, the Iraq War started. You remember the Iraq War? Shock and awe. I knew it was coming before it started. I mean, everybody knew it was coming. And I spent the week before the sermon that Sunday, and I think the war was going to begin in a few days later, wrestling with the Bible, wrestling with Jesus, wrestling with my call to ministry. I was 44. I was a brand new guy in this big, beautiful church, place I dreamed of serving. And I literally cried my way through my manuscript. I'll confess, I was afraid I was going to get fired. But I didn't want to wake up on Monday after that sermon and not have spoken out against a war that I thought was immoral and something we shouldn't do. You might disagree with me, I understand. Also, when I preached that sermon, I always write a manuscript, but I was really in the manuscript, and I made sure that I didn't get off the page too much. And I also used a very quiet voice. I got some feedback, most of it positive. Even a friend of mine, who later became a good friend, we weren't friends then, I'd already been in the church 2 or 3 months, took me to lunch. And he said, essentially, I disagree with that entire sermon. But the next day I got up and thought, well, maybe my preacher at least ought to be for peace. And maybe that's a good thing, that somebody is always advocating for peace. As much as I think this war is righteous and we should do it, I just want you to know that. And then we became good friends. We still disagree on politics on about 99% of everything, but we found a place where we could have a conversation and a dialogue. So I think that's part of what's going on with Pope Leo and some of the others. It is. I'll say this quickly and then move on. It is unusual that a pope would get attacked by a politician. That's the unusual thing about all this. There's plenty of times when leaders left and right have not liked what the pope has said about them, and they just kind of grin and bear it and go along with it. But the idea that, well, you get the point. I know you're still quite young. Thank you very much. You should go see your eye doctor tomorrow. But what would you like to do when you retire that you don't have time to do right now? So when I retire, I will join a church and go to church and participate in church. But I will sleep in on Sunday morning. I might go to the 9 o'clock service at whatever church we end up in. We're still debating whether it's going to be Kansas City or San Francisco. The San Francisco boy wants Kansas City because it costs a lot of money to live in San Francisco. The farm girl I married wants to go to San Francisco. So go to Chico's and buy some stuff from her. She needs it. So yeah, one of the things I want to do is really not, the hardest thing about what I do right now, and I'm not whining or complaining, I love it, is Sunday's always coming. I mean, it's a relentless drumbeat. You know, when somebody says to me on Monday, "Wow, how are you feeling about yesterday's sermon? I thought it was really good." Whatever. And I'm like, I can't even remember what I was saying. I'm working on next Sundays. That's the one thing that my friend Carla, who has my old job in Kansas City, Carla 80. She's a great preacher. She was my number one preacher when I was gone. About 3 months into her new job, she sent me a text. "You didn't tell me how hard it is to preach every Sunday." And I wrote back and said, "Yes, I did. You just didn't believe me." So yeah, not having to do that is probably the biggest thing. And then Julie and I are going to travel. We were talking about some of our TDRA stuff and all that, and what's the deal, required minimum, whatever all that stuff is. Anyway, that's how we're going to travel. We have some money saved up that we've saved up over the years, where we're going to take one big trip a year. And when we retire, we're planning to do New Zealand for about 3 weeks. So if you've got a friend who would like a couple people to sleep with them in their house in their spare room, we'd be happy to. No, I'm just kidding about that. So yeah, travel a lot. That's the biggest deal. My granddaughter Celia is heading for the Dominican Republic for 2 years. Yes, that's right. Anyway, she'll be there in the DR with the Peace Corps for a 2-year stay. Please keep her in your prayers. I will. That's cool. Who's here? Who is it? Is that you, Margaret? Oh, it's you. Oh, that's your daughter. Well, good for her. Yeah. Awesome. Wouldn't it be cool? I mean, I'm not running for office, so I can say wild and crazy things like this. I would love if we had a 1 year to 18-month mandatory service for your country once you graduate from high school. I would just love that. And you could pick the military, you could pick the Peace Corps. We'd have 3 or 4 or 5 different things like that would be available. I just think that would be a great thing. I've known a few Peace Corps folks who were Peace Corps people back in the 60s who have incredible stories. All right, it's 5 till. Any other questions one follow-up? Summer, please. Here you go. Hey, use the mic.
Oh, okay. Do you think that when our pets and other animals pass away that they will also go to heaven?
Revelation 21, one of my favorite texts in all the Bible, says, "In the end of all ends, God will make all things new." I firmly believe that someday we'll see our boy Zeke and our girl Layla and our girl Sally and her daughter Poppin and Belle, our other dog. Did I get all the dogs named? Cats I'm not so sure about, but sorry. So I can't be a politician. No, I firmly believe that all things means all things. And what that's going to be like and how that's going to happen, I don't know. But I really believe, for example, working on this sermon for Sunday. I'm not going to include this in the sermon because it's too much. But Rob Bell talks a lot in his book, What We Talk About When We Talk About God, about how all of us, how similar we are. Like I forget the numbers, but we're super similar to mice. Did you know that? We're super similar to the average house cat. Like 96% of our DNA is the same as an ape. So this thing called life, and all of us, everything is made up of stardust. The same stuff that you find in stars, you find in us. It's just a fascinating thing. And I mean, think about this too. When you leave tonight, or when the sun sets, look up at the sky. What are you looking at? Billions of years ago. That light is just now reaching here. When the sun comes up in the morning, that's 8-month-old sunlight. I mean 8 minute sunlight. I think everything is going to be reconstituted, and I just love the sense that whatever the resurrection is going to be, that's going to be true for not just for us, but for all things, including our pets. I heard Tony Campola once say, great Baptist preacher. A mom had come to him, and she's very worried about her son. He died tragically, and there was something awful for her. When they put his body in the ground in a casket and buried him in the ground, she just had this horrible, awful feeling of, will God be able to find him? What will happen? And Jesus was resurrected 3 days later. What about us? I mean, the bodies are still there, and what's going to happen? And Tony had this fascinating response. And again, I'm paraphrasing. His fascinating response was, I believe that the way we live right now is one sliver of how time works. And whatever we think time is, it's a false construct. Just read some of these, it's crazy stuff. And he said, I believe that what will happen at the end of all ends, all of us, everything, will be resurrected together at the same time. Now, if you've got a vision that Grandpa is in heaven and he's looking down on you, or your friend that you love, that's totally fine. But there's something about that idea that the time we live is different from the way time itself actually works. Another of my favorite theologians, and then I'll let you go because it's exactly 7, is Robert Capon. He believes that the cross of Christ was planted outside of time in the universe. And that is a sign that God will work with us regardless of whatever time we find ourselves in. That's kind of a wild thought to end on. All right. Thank you, everybody. This was fun.